This lesson is a short review for cellular respiration and fermentation. So we start with glucose, as you see here in the diagram, and as you see here in the equation for cellular respiration. During glycolysis, the first stage of cellular respiration, glucose is split into two molecules of pyruvate. Now what happens to pyruvate all depends on whether there's oxygen present in the cell or not. If oxygen is present, then pyruvate enters the mitochondria and gets oxidized into acetyl-CoA. Two pyruvate molecules get oxidized into two acetyl-CoA molecules. Which can enter the Krebs cycle. And then 6 molecules of carbon dioxide are produced. 2 molecules of carbon dioxide are produced from pyruvate oxidation, and then the other 4 are produced during Krebs cycle, the 2 cycles of Krebs cycle. And then water here, 6 molecules of water are produced during oxidative phosphorylation, and also the energy. Most of the energy also is produced during oxidative phosphorylation, up to 34 ATP during the last stage, which is oxidative phosphorylation. And 2 are produced during Krebs cycle and 2 ATP during glycolysis, but notice no ATP during pyruvate oxidation. So the purpose here of the Krebs cycle especially was to produce these energy carriers to get sent to the electron transport chain, the electron carriers. All of them got sent to the electron transport chain. That's what powers up the ATP synthesis to produce ATP. So NADH gave up its electrons to complex 1, and FADH2 gives up its electrons to complex 2. And as you can see, they all travel the same path. And as they are going from one complex to another, they are actually pairing up these enzyme complexes to pump protons, into the intermembrane space. They all travel here until they're dropped off in the mitochondrial matrix to oxygen, which is the final electron acceptor and the most electronegative. So we start with the least electronegative to the most electronegative. Complex 1 is least, complex 2 more electronegative, complex 3 more than 1 and 2, and then complex 4 is the most electronegative. So more electronegative means more electron hungry, and oxygen is the most electronegative because it has 6 electrons in its valence shell, and it wants very much to form the octet, to get 2 more electrons to complete its outer shell to be stable. So the more electronegative means the less energy level. So that means we're starting with the highest energy level, complex 1, and complex 2 less energy level, complex 3 even less, and complex 4 less. And all this pumping of hydrogens, protons, power up, cause an electrochemical gradient that power up ATP synthesis, as I explained in the previous video, which causes it to spin like a turbine, this part to spin like a turbine, and that causes it to turn ADP into ATP. Okay, so as we said before, the fate of pyruvate depends on if the oxygen is present or not. We did talk about what happens when oxygen is present. That's aerobic respiration, cell respiration, also called aerobic respiration. Now, when oxygen is not present, what happens is that the pyruvate stays in the cytosol, in the cytoplasm, where there's no oxygen, and goes through a process called fermentation. Now, in muscle cells, that's lactate fermentation. So what happens in lactate fermentation is that pyruvate is converted into lactic acid. And lactic acid is actually a byproduct, but the purpose of that is to turn NADH back into NAD+, so glycolysis can start all over again. So this happens when muscle cells run out of oxygen because you're doing too much exercise, so you're doing too much strenuous exercise and not enough oxygen for all that exercise. So to get energy fast, what happens is that when you get the NAD+, you can start glycolysis again and get 2 more ATPs every time. And this is a fast way to get 2 ATPs. Yes, the aerobic cellular respiration is more efficient, but it takes longer and it needs oxygen. So under strenuous exercise, when there's not enough oxygen, lactate fermentation will provide some energy, but you can have lactic acid buildup, which could cause cramps. That's when you do a lot of exercise, you sometimes get cramps from a lot of exercise. A lot of walking, you get a cramp in your leg. That's from the lactic acid. And there is also anaerobic conditions for yeast. They actually go through ethanol fermentation. I will get into more detail about that in a different video, but this is just a review, a quick review. So, and a couple practice questions here. During aerobic respiration, which electron carrier directly donates electrons to the electron transport chain at a lower energy level? Well, there was 2 of them, but it's FADH2. As you saw here, as you go to the right, the energy level is lower. So we're starting from a higher energy level. NADH donates to complex 1, which is at a higher energy level. FADH2 donates to complex 2, and complex 2 is at a higher, is at a lower energy level. So FADH2. And explain what happened to pyruvate in muscle cells when there is no oxygen. Pyruvate is converted to lactate and NADH is oxidized into NADH. So glycolysis can be repeated to get more ATP molecules. And that's the end of this review.